And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska marine weather outlook that'll take us through Sunday and Monday. On this Saturday afternoon, though, we are looking at the ice extent here in the Bering Sea along the southwest coast. And we do have another weather system, a low pressure and frontal system that'll be pulling up across the Pribilof Islands into Bristol Bay as we go through Sunday night and on Monday. This is going to keep things kind of active and rough here. We don't expect much more in the way of ice growth in the short term in at least Bristol Bay. But as we get into next week, much colder air. We're going to have offshore flow, northeast to north flow down here across the eastern Bering and west side of the state. Eventually, those winds will be more northwesterly coming across the Alaska Peninsula, so we do expect the ice to want to shift southward next week. Also, it may tend to grow a bit because of the colder air mass that'll be settling in here across the west side of the state. In Cook Inlet, we may see a little more ice development as well. Some of the coldest temperatures will be settling into south central here for the mid and latter portion of the upcoming week. Well, looking at the weather map, what's going to bring about this pattern shift? We right now have, at least as of late tonight, early on Sunday morning, we've had one low in the northwest corner of the Gulf. That's going to kind of fill in. Another low pushing inland across the southern panhandle. That's going to bring the bout of snowfall to Prince of Wales Island and also around Petersburg, Wrangell, where winter weather advisories for 2 to 5 inches of snow for tonight into early Sunday morning. The snows in Anchorage have let up. Patchy light snow in the interior, and then here comes the next low crossing the central western Berings tonight into Sunday. And by Sunday afternoon, that low will emerge north of the central Aleutians and the lower Bering. Meanwhile, the low continues inland into British Columbia with a lingering trough. This trough will be kind of a focus where we have secondary development happen early next week. So what's going to happen by the time we get into Monday is this low is going to track eastward, and the winds and things around that could bring some additional snow along areas of the southwest coast. And then the secondary low will form just east there of Kodiak Island. That low will work east-southeastward early next week, and it's going to become the main system. This one will weaken back here, and this will become the main low. And that's going to bring another round of accumulating snow to areas of the Panhandle later Monday night and on Tuesday, so keep that in mind. But as that low works its way east-southeastward, northeast to north winds on the backside of the low are going to draw down a reinforcing shot of Arctic air southward across the mainland, especially down along the west side of the state and across the Alaska Peninsula. So we are going to trend toward a colder weather pattern here to end February and to start out the month of March. Looking at the marine forecast, though, for the interior channels here, gusty winds on Sunday. We expect north winds to 30 knots, Stevens Passage, Lynn Canal, with gusts as high as 45-knot gales. Waves could build as high as 8 to near 9 feet. The southern end, northwest winds to 30 knots there, Dixon Entrance, 9-foot waves. The outer coast, look for northeast to north winds 30 to 35 knots with swells running anywhere from about 10 to as high as 16, 17 feet there offshore and south of Sitka and Craig. For Monday, the north winds continue there in the inner channels, Stevens Passage, Lynn Canal. Northerly winds 30 knots, gusts to 45 knots there. Lynn Canal, waves running at least 6-7 feet. Northwest winds at 20 knots, Ketchikan, Metlakatla. East-northeast offshore flow anywhere from 20 to 30 knots, and waves and swells running generally in the 8 to 12-foot range. And then looking at Sunday for the northwestern Gulf, the low pressure that was here Saturday afternoon is weakened and peeled off toward the southeast. North winds Prince William Sound, 20 knots, 4-foot waves. Lower Cook Inlet, look for west to northwest winds, 40 knots with swells 10, 11 feet. And then on Monday, with that front approaching from the west, winds are going to go easterly along the northwestern Gulf, anyway, upwards of 35-knot gales there outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, 25 knots Prince William Sound with 6-foot waves, 30 to 35-knot easterly winds with 7 to 8-foot swells there in Lower Cook Inlet and northeast of Kodiak City. On Sunday, 25 to 30 knot west-northwest winds around Kodiak Island. As we go into the central Alaska Peninsula, winds variable 20 knots because they're going to be shifting back around to the southeast and picking up 25 to 30 knots towards False Pass and Cold Bay. And then Monday, with that frontal system powering through, we have the one low that's going to be moving up here toward Bristol Bay, while secondary low tries to get organized over here. So winds will be southeast to south, 25 to 30 knots around Kodiak Island, increasing 40 to 45 knot southwest to west gales from middle and lower Alaska Peninsula, and seas on the North Pacific side anywhere from 8 to as high as 15 feet south of False Pass, and those seas will build on the Bering side 15 to over 20 feet there north of Cold Bay. The Aleutians on Sunday, we have the low crossing there. By Sunday afternoon, the low will be centered north of Adak in the lower Bering. Ahead of it, southeast to south winds 25 to 30 knots. Following the frontal passage, southwest, then west-northwest winds 25 to 30 knots. And on Monday, strongest winds will be over the eastern Aleutians. We're looking at 35 to 45 knot westerly gales from the central Aleutians into the eastern Aleutians. Strongest winds around and northeast there of Dutch Harbor. Further west, look for westerly winds 30 knots there west of Adak back through Shemya. And then the southwest coast, northwest winds 10 knots there in Bristol Bay on Sunday. Northerly winds out of Kuskokwim Bay there, a couple of foot waves. Easterly gales to 35 knots, Pribilof Islands with swells of 10 feet. But look for west winds into Norton Sound and along the lower Yukon Delta 10 to 15 knots. And for Monday, with that low down in this region, ahead of it, southeast to south winds 25 knots into Bristol Bay. Backside circulation northwesterly 30 knots, Pribilof Islands, and then 25 knot winds out of the northeast out of Norton Sound, and north winds to 30 knots along the lower Yukon coast through the Atoll Strait. And for the areas south of the Bering Strait, look for north to northwest winds 10 to 15 knots. As we go up through the lower Chukchi Sea, west winds 10 to 15 knots, and then winds turn easterly, Wainwright back through Kaktovik. Strongest winds there between Utqiagvik and Wainwright out of the east at 20 to 25 knots. And then on Monday, in the far north, the Arctic coast, east winds 15 knots at Kaktovik. West-southwest winds at 10 knots there, Prudhoe Bay through Utqiagvik. Those winds then flip around to the north at 15 knots, increasing to 25 knots through the Bering Strait and to the north side of St. Lawrence Island. So we'll feel that increase in winds there through the Bering Strait and again on the north sides of St. Lawrence Island and into Norton Sound.